Hey there. Sorry for my short-term hiatus, but I'm back. And for your patience, dear viewer, I gift you Daredevil. And no, not the one you're hoping for. The early 2000s was a real treasure trove of both great and terrible comic book films. For every Spider-Man, you got Catwoman. And smack dab in the middle of those is 2003's Daredevil. Now personally, I've never read the comics, but I've always liked Daredevil ever since I was first introduced to him in the 90s animated Spider-Man series.
Murdoch sent me to get you out. Who are you? I'm called the Daredevil.
But it was only after I saw the Netflix series where I really fell in love with the character. And by the time Charlie Cox was all over the MCU, I kind of just overlooked the 2003 film. It didn't help that I've only heard bad things about it. It seems like everyone agrees that it's a terrible movie. And after watching it, I have to say that, yes, it's really, really bad. But it does have some redeeming qualities to it. This movie was directed and written by Mark Steven Johnson. If that name doesn't ring a bell, he's the same guy behind the Ghost Rider movie starring Nicolas Cage. And I think that's all you need to know. He was first attached to the film in 1999 after Marvel almost went bankrupt and Sony began a project about the blind vigilante until in 2000, New Regency acquired the rights to Daredevil where 20th Century Fox would distribute the film. This juggling between studios is made the more ironic because in 1997, prior to Mark Steven Johnson's involvement, Fox optioned the rights to Daredevil, but after they let it expire, Disney actually entered negotiations to acquire the rights, but it never happened. Which is insane to think about considering Sony, Fox, and Disney would go on to own different characters within Marvel, and they all had their hands on Daredevil at one point. Mark Steven Johnson's goal for the film was to make it dark and gritty, that was faithful to the comics and one that respected the fans.
There's always like a couple of things that every filmmaker's got to face. One is the fans, and I'm one of them. And this is like my mythology, and these are the guys that I worship and I respect. And that's probably always been my biggest concern, is making sure the fans feel satisfied. At the same time, the non-fans will understand it.
How well did he succeed? Well, let's find out. Before I start, I want to preface that I'm mainly using the director's cut of the film. Mark Steven Johnson stated that this was the original cut intended for theaters before the studio decided to reduce the runtime. There are some big differences between both cuts of the film, but I'll bring it up when it's relevant. The movie starts with a shot of Daredevil hugging a cross, and then we get an unintentionally hilarious scene. This will make a little more sense with context later on though. His life then flashes through his eyes and we get a little origin story. After a mini Matt Murdock gets bullied by some kids, he goes home to his dad, Jack Murdock, a now washed up boxer. Jack doesn't like Matt getting into fights, but Matt says that the bullies were giving him shit.
Don't curse.
Oh, sorry. The bullies were telling him about how Jack works for a well-known mobster named Fallon. He denounces these accusations and we cut to somewhat in the future where Matt is an A+ student. He tries to look for his dad, but only finds him roughing up some guy. Disappointed, he runs off, and after a forklift collides with a chemical barrel, Matt is blinded. We see his heightened senses, or radar sense, and I think it looks pretty cool. It's an interesting way to show what Matt quote-unquote sees, and while I think it gets quite excessive soon, I still like it. Matt is initially overwhelmed by his senses, but when his dad shows up, he's just perfectly fine all of a sudden. In fact, now he's doing gymnastics along a rooftop and grinding like he's Tony Hawk. He also finds those bullies again, which, damn, they want to fight a blind kid? But Matt turns on Jedi Matrix mode and gets rid of all of them. Meanwhile, Jack is committed to get back into the ring where he meets Fallon, who wants him to throw the fight. And when he refuses after getting some motivating words from Matt, he's killed in an alley, where Matt recreates the Frank Miller cover. This whole movie is actually full of references. Mark Steven Johnson is a big fan of the comics, and there are so many visual nods and name drops that show this. In the conversation with Hector Fallon, he also says this.
Miller, Mac, Bendis, they're all my fighters.
Which is a reference to Frank Miller, David Mack, and Brian Michael Bendis respectively, all of whom are famous Daredevil authors. The movie takes the most inspiration from Frank Miller's The Man Without Fear run. Everyone says it over and over and over again.
I was the boy without fear.
How do you kill a man without fear?
Not without fear.
They call you the man without fear.
What's interesting though, that in the comics, Matt has his accent when he pushes an old man out of the way of a truck carrying chemicals, which also happens in the Netflix series. But in the movie, the accident is caused when Matt discovers his father's criminal life. This is actually Daredevil's origin in the 90s animated series.
I couldn't deal with the shame of what I'd seen my dad doing. It was the last thing I ever saw.
I find it really cool that Mark Steven Johnson grabs inspiration and influence from all kinds of Daredevil stories. Also, fun fact, according to the first issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like the first ever one, the same chemical spill that created Daredevil also made the Ninja Turtles. I'm not joking. We finally cut back to adult Matt Murdock, played by everyone's favorite superhero actor, Ben Affleck, best known for his role in DD.
Don't go away, my heart. Why you dunking me, girl? Why you dunking?
Okay, no, I'm joking. I actually like Ben Affleck in this role. I don't find him insanely charismatic or charming, but luckily we don't get many scenes of that. But he's really good at being sad and brooding though. Maybe because that's just Ben Affleck in real life. He wakes up in his sensory deprivation chamber, which I think is a neat addition. Since his senses are so overwhelming at times, this water coffin blocks off his senses while he can catch some Z's. But obviously he doesn't really care, because when he prepares for work, he cranks up his stereo to max volume. I assume this is the drowned noise from outside, but I feel like he should just get some headphones, right? Wouldn't loudspeakers really hurt? We cut to a courthouse with Matt and his friend Foggy Nelson, played by Jon Favreau. They're currently representing a victim of corrupt cop and rapist Jose Quesada, whose name is a reference to artist Joe Quesada. What a weird way to reference an iconic artist, right? By naming a rapist after him. Matt knows he's lying because he can hear his heartbeat, so that night he has a very 2000 suit up scene. I think now we should talk about this suit. I think it looks decent. The suit went through a lot of different variations throughout the production of the film. They tried spandex, but it looked too silly, and at one point he had leather ears, like Captain America in that 90s film. I think the leather getup is weird, but I understand that they're trying to go for something practical, and maybe keep that sheen look you have in the comics. I mean, he just ends up looking like a gimp. More like fucking BDDSM, am I right?
One time, can I get a Dunkin'? Feel me? Feel me?
You know, the thing I like about Daredevil is, at the end of the day, he's not invulnerable. Yes, he has heightened senses, but he doesn't have super healing or any of that. He still gets hurt. So, imagine my shock when he does this. I'm sorry, what? Ignore the bad CGI for a second, but this is insane. He just casually falls 10 stories and he's fine. And then he leaps like a fucking kangaroo rat. This scene is even funnier because earlier in the film, there's a very deliberate shot of Matt's knees cracking as he gets out of his tub. I get that's a comic book film, but the problem is that this film was advertised as a gritty and darker superhero movie. In the original script, Mark Steven Johnson even wrote, "So forget about what you know about superheroes, because this is the real world. In the real world, there is no such thing as mutant healing or spider sense to keep a man alive. In the real world, there's just a guy in a mask." Yeah, okay. This movie is like all over the place in what it wants to be, but you'll see more of that soon. Daredevil catches up to Quesada in Josie's bar, and we get an admittedly pretty cool fight scene, with of course Nickelback playing over it. We get more shots of Daredevil's radar sense as he's trying to track down Quesada while beating up bar folk. I do like this fight overall, but the shots of his radar sense are so visually nauseating to me. It's just constantly flashing in your face, and I think it breaks the overall flow of the fight in general. Then Daredevil chases Quesada down into a subway station, and when he's briefly incapacitated from a train overwhelming his senses, Quesada tries to shoot him. But before he can, Daredevil trips him down onto the tracks. And then obviously Daredevil's gonna save him, right? Like, I know he's a rapist after all, but you know, you don't kill people, Daredevil. That's not really your thing, right?
Hey, that light, the end of the tunnel, guess what? That's not heaven. That's the C train!
Oh, okay. So, yes, Daredevil just let Quesada die. This was and still is a controversial moment in the film, and when I first saw it, I reasonably thought, wow, Mark Steven Johnson doesn't understand Daredevil. It's like Batman all over again. What the fuck? But he actually did understand how against the character this decision would be, and he got put into a dilemma.
Because this was very controversial, what's coming up here.
Yeah.
And you and I know we had some big discussions on it. How do you feel now in hindsight with the idea of Daredevil letting this guy, Daredevil in self-defense, the guy ends up on the tracks through Daredevil defending himself, but he could have pulled him off those tracks. He could have. And he didn't. I mean, it was the decision I came out at the end was that we were trying to tell a story about a guy who is losing his soul. And at the end of about a guy who learns mercy. But I also was very concerned as a fan of having Daredevil let someone die.
For the record, I don't like that Daredevil killed in this scene. That's against his character and like everything he stands for. And the biggest problem is that I don't even think this kill amplifies his arc like Mark Steven Johnson intended. If anything, it makes it even more confusing. But I do understand what he was conflicted with. And as long as he understood the significance of this decision and how against the character it would be, I think it's fine. So the cops are at the crime scene where Quesada's two halves are taken away. I feel like if a train collided into you, you would probably get mangled up instead of just split in half, right? I don't really want to find out if I'm right or wrong. So, any train experts watching, let me know down in the comments what would happen if you got hit by a train. Would you get split into two, or would you get mangled up into 1,000 pieces? Enlighten me. What the fuck am I saying? So Ben Urich shows up. He's a reporter investigating the mysterious mobster known as the Kingpin, as well as the masked vigilante Daredevil. And I guess Daredevil left a cool logo for the cops to find. I think it's meant to be a reference to the Crow, but what I think the director forgot to reference is a mirror, because the reflection in Ben Urich's glasses is wrong. We see an exhausted Matt go home and listen to his answering machine, where we hear that his relationship never seemed to go through because he's always so distant and committed to being Daredevil. I like all these scenes. It's a more realistic take on the reality of being a vigilante. But again, scenes like this, juxtaposed with scenes like this, continue to confuse the overall tone of the film. Matt and Foggy hang out at a coffee shop where we get some neat banter. I think Jon Favreau is pretty good in this role, but outside of making jokes or acting dumb, he doesn't really have much of a character. And while that may be how he is in some iterations in the comics, I don't think it works with the small amount of screen time he's given here. So in comes Elektra, played by Jennifer Garner. Matt follows her outside and even grabs her because she's pretty, I guess. Anyways, this sets off one of the goofiest fight scenes I've ever witnessed. I get that they're not really fighting, it's meant to be kind of flirtatious, but what is this? Why are they doing this in a playground? Why are we getting close-ups of kids being feral over two grown adults flipping around on seesaws? Who thought of this? I do have to give credit where credit is due and commend the stunt coordinators and wire team who planned all of this. Master Cheng Yun Yuan worked as a fight choreographer mainly for the wire work. He and his team would actually go on to work on The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revelations, which explains a lot. And I gotta say, watching the homemade videos of his team planning the composition of these scenes is pretty awesome. I personally think the wire work is overused in this film, and again ruins the gritty and dark tone the film is attempting to go for at this point. But that doesn't mean I don't respect the time and effort that went into these scenes. And from what I can tell, Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner actually did their own stunts, which is pretty cool. We are then introduced to Kingpin, played by Michael Clark Duncan. And I gotta say, I think he's perfect for this role. He carries that intimidating presence throughout the film, and dude's pretty fucking big. He's 6'5" and weighed around 330 pounds in this film.
Well, first of all, Mark told me I had to gain weight because I was at 305 maybe when I met with Mark last year. And he said, well, Kingpin's a big guy, so you got to at least get up to 335.
And yes, he doesn't look comic book accurate, and his casting actually got a lot of backlash. But according to Mark Steven Johnson, Michael Clark Duncan was casted simply because he was the best fit for the role. No other reason.
I think Michael's the best big man working today. And in the comic books, Kingpin is white. I was adamant that we get the best actor for the role and the best big man for the role, and that was Michael. So I think, the spirit of the character is much better served by going by the best person for the role instead of trying to match, color, skin tones.
Kingpin has a conversation with Nicholas Nachios, Elektra's father. He wants out since Ben Urich is poking around Kingpin's activities and it'll eventually lead to him. So Kingpin wants to frame him and cause a Bullseye to assassinate him. We then cut to Bullseye, played by Colin Farrell, no less.
Tell me, how's saying? That's for John Lennon, you Yankee fucking cunt.
Bullseye's whole power is that he can turn any object into a lethal projectile, which he showcases here when he kills a man with paper clips, or later when he kills an old woman with a peanut. In the comics, Bullseye wears dark blue spandex with a bullseye symbol on his mask. But because that was apparently too silly, they gave Colin Farrell a branded bullseye on his forehead in a weird leather alligator scaled coat. Again, I feel bad because it obviously took a lot of time and effort to make this jacket and give it that unique look. But it just ends up making Bullseye into a total edgelord. It doesn't help that Colin Farrell's acting in this movie is so over the top and campy. Again, the tone of this movie is so all over the place. Elektra catches up with Matt and they have a little interaction, but this time less playground and more rain. We learn that Matt can essentially see when there's rain because there's so many droplets, you know. Unfortunately, it's cut short when Matt has to leave and beat up a thug. And he doesn't like it when he gets cockblocked, so he just beats this dude senseless. There's a touching scene after Daredevil beats up the thug, and it's the shot of this kid being terrified and afraid for his life. Daredevil is obviously confused, and he repeats this line over and over again.
I'm not the bad guy, kid. I'm not the bad guy.
But we'll see why this scene doesn't really work. Matt and Foggy are invited to the Grand Hotel by Elektra. Meanwhile, Bullseye kills a cameo from Frank Miller and steals his motorcycle. Elektra leaves after her father is given a parting rose by Kingpin. So Bullseye is now doing whatever this is, while Daredevil is on the prowl, all while Rob Zombie is playing in the background. Okay, I'm gonna take a detour and talk about the music. The film's soundtrack is very bizarre, because you have an original soundtrack composed by Graham Revel, which I think it's fine. It's nothing memorable, but it gets the job done. But then they add all these licensed songs into the film, and they're just so silly. I'm sure it was good for its time, but it's so excessive in my opinion. The movie would actually release a full album featuring bands like Finger 11, Nickelback, Drowning Pools, Evanescence, and Hoobastank. And I'm sure fans of this kind of music enjoy it, and I've heard that people became fans after watching this movie, which is cool. I just think it's excessive and kind of corny. For some reason, Elektra looks out the open sunroof to see Daredevil running, but she doesn't look forward to see Bullseye standing on a moving motorcycle. So Bullseye used ninja stars to cause the car to crash, and Daredevil, with his super knees, hops down. And oh my god, what is this? One thing I also need to address is the CGI. Yes, it looks bad, but I think it's more of a product of its time than negligence. The film didn't get an insanely high budget, and they weren't given a lot of time in general.
Here's the reality of the situation. We started this with a 61-day first unit schedule and a 28-day second unit schedule.
It's not realistic when you have performance and when you have actors doing stunts that you're going to get a first unit done in 61 days.
For me, especially, I'm already struggling because I've never made a movie this size. They wanted everything, but they didn't want to give us the days. And so what would happen is we would just get days as we needed them as we went, but with always that kind of pressure and threat of you're going over what was an unrealistic schedule to begin with.
They actually try to do some of the insane Daredevil jumping scenes with a stunt double, and despite it being a cool stunt, it just doesn't look right.
Wire work will eat up your shooting night. It can be so frustrating. And you do take after take after take, and you'll watch, in our case, not the sun go down, but the sun come up, and you realize you're running out of valuable time. That, to me, was a big eye-opener. As great as wire work is, it has its limitations, and you have to know what they are, because it will really, really cost you.
So, led by VFX supervisor Rich Thorne, a full CGI model of Daredevil was made. And again, it doesn't look great nowadays, but Thorne knew when something was off. So it's not like a lazy drag and drop type situation.
It all looks great, but he's animated funny. Doesn't work. If he's animated great, but he doesn't look real, you don't get away with that. Let's say the animation and he looks real, but the backgrounds he's being put over don't look real, you don't get away with that. So we have to nail everything on this movie.
I still think the movie overuses CGI. There are a lot of scenes where you can just cut it out and it wouldn't hurt the film in any way. So Bullseye throws Daredevil's baton at Nicholas Nachios, but Daredevil is unable to save him after his radar sense is thrown off by an exploding motorcycle. And somehow, Elektra doesn't notice Bullseye threw it, even though she was conscious enough to see Daredevil's baton, and if she just turned her head, she would have seen Bullseye doing this taunt thing. But no, she just sees Daredevil and starts shooting at him. He does manage to get away and gets even madder at home. So there's a whole side plot involving a character played by Coolio that's missing from the theatrical version of the film. It's essentially a mystery story following Matt and Foggy as they investigate the death of a woman named Lisa Taggio, and Coolio was framed for it. Foggy, with the help of Karen Page, she's in like 2 scenes, figures out that Wesley, Kingpin's assistant, is connected to the murder. He tells Ben Urich about this, who gets a cameo from Kevin Smith, and figures out that Matt is Daredevil. Meanwhile, Matt finds out that a corrupt cop named Mackenzie lied during the case, and Mackenzie reveals that Kingpin goes after your family, meaning Elektra is in danger. I know that I'm throwing all this at you out of the blur, but you can blame the movie's horrible editing and pacing for that, because these scenes are just sprinkled throughout and I had to wait to put it all in a concise form. That being said, I do like this added subplot. Not only does it give more lawyer scenes, but it also gives Foggy something to do. In the original script, he actually does a whole lot more investigative work, but I'm fine with what we got. But we're about to get something a whole lot better. You thought this movie was so 2000s? Well, how about Elektra training with Bring Me to Life by Evanescence in the background? This song actually debuted in this movie, which is insane. Jennifer Garner also does most of her stunts in this scene, including all the psi flares. She would actually practice these moves at home or even on sets of other movies.
It was just like learning to play the piano. I would give myself little drills to do in my backyard, and I would say, okay, 10 flips going forward, 10 flips going backwards, with the right hand, with the left hand, with both hands, with the right hand, and then figure eights. I trained with the psi every single day on the set of Alias. Don Lee would show up, who just happens to be a psi expert and martial artist, stuntman here in town. And he came and would train me during lunch, whenever the cameras were turning around, whenever I had the tiniest bit of a break. Don was there to work with me, and I had all kinds of things I had to do every single day.
Despite the shit I give the film, it's pretty awesome to see how much passion the cast and crew had during filming. Not gonna lie, I actually like this scene a lot. Because Elektra believes he killed her father, she's hunting Daredevil. Meanwhile, Bullseye, after being assigned to kill her, is hunting Elektra down. And Daredevil is there, hunting Bullseye to protect Elektra. What a weird murder triangle we got going on here, huh? Elektra finds Daredevil and they get into a fight where I love this line delivery from Jennifer Garner.
I didn't kill your father!
Liar!
Then she does a Raiden electric fly and does a backflip that Garner did for real. And then she stabs Daredevil in the shoulder, which totally puts him down, by the way. In the original script, he's stabbed in the stomach, which I think makes a lot more sense. I don't think a shoulder stab would put you down that quickly, but maybe he was tired. She finds out Daredevil is Matt, who tells her about Bullseye, and then the two battle. I actually like this fight. Again, there's some obvious wire work, but it's still decent. But dear God, for 90% of the fight, the camera is just tilted, and it makes me so dizzy. I do like how Bullseye incorporates his ugly outfit into his fighting style. Like, he uses his coat to Batman cape stun at times. I still wish he had a comic book accurate suit though. It's hilarious though because there's an earlier scene where he says this.
Is there anything else?
Yeah, I want a fucking costume.
And he never gets a costume. Why would he say that? If there was a moment to get a classic Bullseye outfit, this scene would be it. Because this is recreating an iconic fight in the Frank Miller comics. They even recreate a lot of specific moments from it down to specific lines.
Good, baby. I'll give you that. But me, I'm magic.
Then Bullseye kills Elektra as Daredevil watches helplessly. I guess all that super jumping finally took a toll on him. I have to say, Elektra's death in the film just didn't hit as hard as I expected it would. Matt and Elektra's relationship just never seems believable to me. It's not that they don't have on-screen chemistry, it's just we don't get many scenes between the two to convince me that they fell for each other in the first place. I mean, think about other comic book film relationships like Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy or Clark Kent and Lois Lane. These relationships seem believable because we get to see their connections form gradually throughout the film. With Matt and Elektra though, it's like their relationship developed off-screen and we're just cutting to random parts of it. Here's the thing, I can possibly buy this relationship if it's not implied that Matt has recently broken up with his now ex-girlfriend in this earlier scene. Having Matt be lonely for months or even years can justify why he'd fall for Elektra. After becoming Daredevil, he'd learn that he's unable to commit to any sort of relationship, and even though he tries, he ends up ruining it because of his secret identity. But when he meets Elektra, someone who not only has a connection to him through a familial loss, but even when he tries to give up on her, she doesn't give up on him. And when she unmasks him, she isn't scared or mad, she apologizes. And after that, she's killed. Like, it sounds like that should work, right? But for me at least, the problem is that with the implication that Matt was in love with someone earlier, but doesn't try with her like he did with Elektra, makes him seem like a bad person. And we all know that.
I'm not the bad guy.
So a wounded Daredevil escapes to the church, where the movie began, and his life flash ends. Did the entire movie just happen through that flash? That's a pretty interesting choice. Bullseye shows up, and the two get into another CGI fight sponsored by The Wire. In the original script, this fight is actually non-existent. Bullseye just takes an injured Daredevil up to the church bell to kill him. There's actually a funny scene where Daredevil threw his baton at Bullseye's face, knocking his teeth out, to which Bullseye spats them into Daredevil's eyes. Which sounds ridiculous, but this actually happens in the comics. It's probably not in the final film because I imagine Colin Farrell missing his 2 front teeth would look really funny. Don't worry though, because in the final film, we still get some really funny looking shit. There's more characters floating around, Daredevil becomes Rubberman Neo some more, and Bullseye turns full Looney Tunes. He makes so many weird noises and goofy faces. Again, despite all this, I commend the stunt team for setting all this up. It's just the final execution that's the problem. Bullseye figures out Daredevil's hypersensitive ears and starts banging the church bell like he's getting rid of a symbiote. Then he gives a classic villain monologue, but it only gives Daredevil the strength to withstand the giant stake from stabbing him. Hey, wait a minute. Are you sure this isn't your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man? And admittedly, a pretty cool scene happens. Wait, Bullseye is Jesus? Huh. If I had an awful film every time a comic book movie adapted from a Frank Miller comic starring Ben Affleck playing a brooding sad murderer where his antagonist symbolized Jesus, I'd have one awful movie. And Daredevil. No, I'm joking.
Who is TikTok?
So Daredevil grabs Bullseye, who's begging for mercy, and throws him out a window. And I know that he's alive, and this scene is supposed to replicate the comics, but when your supposed hero talks all about how he's not the bad guy, then proceeds to throw a man out a window, I don't think it works here. And since we didn't get any visual or audio cue that Daredevil knew the car was coming, I'm gonna assume he wanted Bullseye to die.
Bullseye.
Daredevil finds Kingpin, and we get our climactic and by far the best fight of the movie. I like how Kingpin's strength is displayed by having his punches fuck with Daredevil's radar sense. There's also not a ton of wire work here. I think there's one, and it's when Kingpin throws Daredevil into a wall. It kind of looks like he's in one of those low gravity chambers. And fun fact, this scene of Daredevil being thrown into a window is actually Ben Affleck. So good on ya. Using a neat callback, Matt uses the room's water system to make it rain. And he defeats Kingpin by seeing again? Oh, and breaking his knees. Then Daredevil, or Matt, I've been changing their names based on their appearances, but it's a little confusing now. Matt Devil has the chance to kill Kingpin once and for all, but he spares him. Why?
I'm not the bad guy.
That's the C train!
Show mercy.
This is why the narrative arc doesn't work, because the film hasn't given us any reason for Daredevil to change his mind all of a sudden. We did get that scene of him having a moment after he scares the kid, but you know, this also happened right after. Now obviously, I'd be pretty damn upset if Daredevil did kill Kingpin. That's not what I'm trying to advocate for. It's just that his supposed arc doesn't work if he's just gonna keep proving he's a, say it with me everyone, bad guy.
This was the argument for the Casado. You know,
Yeah.
right or wrong, that was the whole reason, is that to see where he's gone from the beginning of the movie where he lets a man die in the railroad tracks.
Whatever you say, Mark. You don't give up.
No, I'm still trying to convince myself, Avi. I'm still not sold that it was the right thing to do. I think for this movie it was, but for Daredevil as a character, I'm not sure if it was the right thing to do.
So the movie ends with Kingpin going to prison, Matt and Foggy winning the case for Coolio, and Elektra turning out to be alive, I guess. And Ben Urich, who planned on revealing Daredevil's identity, ultimately decides not to. Knowing Daredevil though, he probably would have snapped his neck if Ben didn't change his mind. Besides his kill rule, I have to say that one thing I felt was missing in this movie was Matt's faith. In the comics, Matt is a Catholic born and raised, and even when he becomes Daredevil, he stays mostly principled in his beliefs. Not only does he believe everyone deserves a second chance and deserves to be spared through his profession as a lawyer, but it's a literal sin to murder. In the movie though, Matt remains distant from religion, only reconsidering it at the end of the movie. But this is actually only in the director's cut. In the theatrical cut, Matt is obviously religious. He goes to confession twice, and there's some neat dialogue between him and Father Everett.
You want permission, and I can't give you that, son.
Justice isn't a sin, Father.
No, but vengeance is. A lawyer during the day, and then judge and jury at night. Is that what you want?
Somebody has to do something.
What about you?
Because I can.
And while this actually makes Quesada's death even worse, you can easily fix that by showing Matt's inner conflict throughout the film. And it's not like he can't have an arc without killing. A perfect example of this is the Netflix show. Throughout the series, Matt stays relatively consistent with his beliefs, but teeters here and there. He often visits church and speaks to Father Lantom in some great conversations about God. There's a great one about the presence of evil where Matt ends it with this question.
What if you could have stopped him from ever hurting anyone again?
Stop them how?
In the third season though, after the death of Elektra, Matt is at his lowest. He feels like he should have died with Elektra, giving his life for Hell's Kitchen, but instead he survives, living with that burden. This causes him to lose his faith with God, and with Kingpin's power only growing as he controls most of the FBI and police, Matt really considers committing the sin. But when he finally has Kingpin at his mercy, after a pretty awesome fight scene I might add, sorry Bullseye, Matt first beats Kingpin to a pulp, and despite everything Matt has been through thanks to Kingpin, he doesn't kill him. He spares him.
Come on! Kill me! No! God knows I want you. But you don't get to destroy who I am. It beat you. I beat you.
It's an incredibly powerful scene that's a culmination of Matt's arc throughout the season, and yet he didn't kill anyone. Now obviously the Netflix series has a huge advantage of being way longer than a 2-hour movie, allowing the characters to develop and grow. Let me introduce you to Daredevil the Man Without Fear, a fan edit by Uncanny Ant-Man. This edit of the film takes parts of the theatrical and director's cut, combining them and rearranging clips around, as well as cutting out scenes with bad CGI, changing the tacky music, and editing around obvious wire work to create a surprisingly effective movie. They cut out the most controversial scenes of the film, like Quesada's death, the playground scene, and the church fight with Bullseye, and it all works for the most part. The movie still feels rushed. Maybe it was because I noticed scenes that should be in specific areas that weren't there, but I think it's mainly the writing and directing. Uncanny Ant-Man worked with what they were given and created a cut of the film that's actually better than both official versions, so props to them. I'll leave a link in the description to the fan edit page, and if you leave the message on their forum account, you should get a link to the edit yourself. So yeah, that was Daredevil. Surprisingly, this movie would go on to gross double its budget at the box office and receive solid reviews from critics. Fox did initially plan a sequel and most of the cast were on board. Ben Affleck agreed to come back as long as Fox were willing to tell a darker story. And Michael Clark Duncan also expressed interest in returning as long as he wouldn't have to gain weight again. He actually would go on to reprise his role as Kingpin in the MTV animated Spider-Man series. Unfortunately, any plans for a sequel died down after the box office flop that was the 2005 spin-off film Elektra. I actually recently sat down to watch the film, because, people talk shit about Daredevil and that wasn't that bad. But, this movie's really bad. Like, it's actually terrible. Fox would still attempt to get Daredevil on the big screen. In 2011, David Slade was attached to directing a reboot film adapting the Born Again storyline. Really weird fun fact here, there was a rumor that David Slade wanted Robert Pattinson to play Matt Murdock, as they both worked together on the Twilight Saga Eclipse. But when asked about it, Pattinson said, "I don't know where that one came from at all." Because Fox had until October 2011 until Marvel would be given back the rights, they scrambled for another opportunity. They got Joe Carnahan to pitch a new idea after David Slade left the project. Carnahan actually pitched a 70s thriller Daredevil movie, which sounds really interesting. But unfortunately in 2012, he would tweet that despite everyone being hyped for it, time ran out, and Marvel would be given back Daredevil. And the year after, Marvel would begin development on the Daredevil Netflix series. Over time, with the superhero genre exploding like crazy with the birth of the MCU, everyone would slowly forget about Daredevil. Everyone except Ben Affleck. In 2006, he would go on to say in an interview that wearing a costume was a source of humiliation for me, and something I wouldn't want to do again soon. And honestly, he was sort of right for believing it, because when he tried to make a comeback by playing Batman, it just made everyone angry or confused.
So I saw the announcement, I look on this thing, I look down the first comment, it's like, Ben Affleck's gonna be Batman. The first one just goes, no!
Hire Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck for fucking Batman! Fuck!
What do you think about the whole hoopla about him being Batman?
He's gonna be what?
Batman.
Ben Affleck's gonna be Batman?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Is he really gonna be? I think that's awesome. I think that's awesome. Is he really gonna be Batman?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Seriously?
What? Why is that weird? I didn't know that. Is that weird?
This is just my opinion, by the way, but much like Daredevil, I feel like Ben Affleck was a good fit for Batman. I think he definitely looked the part and was full of passion for the character. Unfortunately, he was written horribly in every film he would go to star in. He debuted in the, in my opinion, lukewarm Batman v Superman, where he was given this beautiful scene.
Why did you say that name? Please, stop! Why did you say that name?
Which he was also humiliated for once again. And oh my god, he's in Justice League, which was unfortunately struck by tragedy, and the end result is him saying some terrible lines.
I mean, do you talk to fish? Yeah. Oh, something is definitely bleeding.
Well, I knew you didn't bring me back because you like me.
I don't. Not.
But hey, finally the Snyder Cut comes out and he's able to redeem himself, right?
I've been dead inside a long time.
Oh. Well, at least he's in the Flash. And, oh no. His suit looks so ugly. And what's wrong with his face? And he's killing again. And these lines. What is this?
Hi.
Hey.
My ego's far too big to say thank you to someone else. I developed this all-powerful persona to compensate for my childhood trauma.
I know sex exists. I've just never experienced it.
Ben, maybe stick to Dunkin Donuts. At the very least, they will respect you.
Do I look familiar?
Oh. God damn it. So yeah, that was 2003's Daredevil. I thought it was pretty bad, but very fun. I think the cast was solid. I liked some of the music. I just think that the movie ultimately lost its way in both the narrative and the tone. And we can point fingers all day at who's to blame for this. Maybe it was Mark Steven Johnson, maybe it was the studio, maybe it was just the times. Who knows? What I can say though is that the film was made by care from everyone who worked on it. And I can't help but admire Mark Steven Johnson's passion when you listen to him talk about the character.
I feel responsibility to the studio that it does well financially. I feel responsibility to the fans that it be true to the spirit of the comic, and responsibility to myself for how much I've had to sacrifice to make this movie, a time away from my kids and my wife and my friends.
He obviously understands what he's talking about, and I don't deny that he's a fan. I just think that when it came to constructing the film, he wanted to throw all of these references and iconic moments from the comics, and while he may have made a movie for the fans, I think he lost his way and didn't nail making a compelling story. In an interview with Yahoo on the film's 20th anniversary, Mark Steven Johnson would go on to say that, looking back on it, one of the mistakes I made with the film was wanting to put everything in. I wanted to do Daredevil's origin story, and I wanted to do the Elektra saga, and I wanted to introduce Bullseye and Foggy. I wanted everything to be in there. But the film could only support so much. And then when you're told to cut a half hour out and make it more of a love story, things start to feel rushed and not quite right. It's a fan thing. When you love something so much, you want to tell it all. He may not have been the perfect director for the film, but the fact that he's able to reflect on it and acknowledge the choices he made and how he could have done it differently, the fact that he's able to admit that he made some wrong decisions without throwing the blame on anyone else, I can't help but respect that. And at the end of the day, it's just a movie with the intention to entertain. And that it did. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. All three of you? I hope you enjoyed this video. I apologize for being gone for so long, but I am getting back into it. Though I'm not gonna say what I'm currently working on, just in case. But know that I'm here. Okay, take care everyone.